Alright, top 10 fantasy RPGs that aren't Dungeons and Dragons. So let's get to it. Just gonna say that the list is ordered with a mix of personal preference and kind of a directional crosswalk from the original game, because I hope that somebody can find something interesting on the list, but overall, everything I put on the list is excellent, and they're probably all equally good in their own way. So, number 10 is The Dark Eye. So this is Germany's RPG. They play that more. This is the most prolific thing in Germany. And because it's from Germany, it's very well crafted in a mechanical way. Very mechanically constructed, which is very interesting and exciting if you like that kind of thing. Every single thing you can buy is a point. Like you can buy I don't know, I think you can even buy how tall they are or something. And you buy advantages and disadvantages, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I remember I was making a sort of a young elf who was a magician, and I bought disadvantage, he had a sensitive nose, and we said he sneezed like a kitten or something like that, and it was just nice as he's just this sort of young and shiny. He's oh. So it's really fun to buy everything. It's really fun to that. When you get down to the actual game, I was a little bit oh, it's still complicated or something. Now, it isn't that complicated, all right? It's mainly just that I'm not used to it. But it's really weird, when you want to do something, you've got to roll 3 times under 3 different statistics. And I just find that weird. It's only because I'm not used to it. And then I went to get the magic for my wizard. And there was barely any magic. It just wasn't really suitable for what I wanted. They are actually making a magic book. If it was already out, I would just bought it and gone straight in with that. But I feel that was lacking. So overall, I really like the fact that you can spend hours just spending 1 point here or there to make something work. But when I actually got down to it, I was a little bit not quite sure. But I know there's going to be some people who are going to be oh, I love all these adding up and the mechanics and all that sort of thing. So that is my number 10. So, number 9 is Dungeon World. I know that a lot of people really like this. I'm not as hyped on it as everybody else, but I'll get to the main reason why I think this has been a lot of people's go-to game, right? So when you play a normal game, when you play Dungeons and Dragons or something like that, the way the rules are written, they're written in such a way that you come from a kind of a video gamey background if you approach it that way. And if you want to do something, it feels like you're pressing a button. So you want to attack, so you're going to press the attack button. And there's a rule for attacking. That's kind of what it feels like. Dungeon World is different in the sense that you have to be narrative about it. It encourages you to be narrative. So when you're narrative, it will then trigger a rule, which is kind of the other way round. You kind of get into this, oh, well, I'm just following the rules kind of thing, and what kind of cool move can I use? But actually, it's the narrative that matters. So what I think the difference is, Dungeons & Dragons, I would say that uses intelligence. You're intelligently saying, what can I do here? What do I have here? Whereas in Dungeon World, that uses wisdom, because it's encouraging you to say, how do I feel about this situation? And what would thematically and narratively happen, and therefore, what do I trigger from it? Now, the reason I wasn't so hyped on that is because I do that anyway. I didn't realize that you weren't, but I don't know. Everyone's got a different playstyle, hadn't they, right? So, okay. Number 8 is Index Card RPG. This is by Ryuutama, Hankerin Ferinale. He has his own YouTube channel, and he is a creator that I really appreciate. And I really appreciate his views and his design philosophies. So this is his take on that in a book, in a game. So obviously I had to get that because I really like his work. So because of that, this book is filled with his casual approach to the way things should work in a game. And he's got some really smart, intelligent applications of things that he uses to make the game. Now, obviously, because it's called Index Card RPG, the main kind of thing of the game is that you use index cards to represent things on the table. Now, for me personally, I'm not interested in that at all. But if you take that away, the game it doesn't fall apart because the whole thing is made up of his design scheme, you know? So, everything and the directions he approaches it is really cool and smart, and I think will be very engaging for people, especially in a newcomerish kind of way, right? Now, the only thing about that is, because it's all compartmentalized in that kind of way, it feels like more of a toolbox than a full game. Now, that sounds like I'm being negative. He actually has approached it on purpose to make it be like a toolbox. And he says in there, take what you like and don't use what you don't. So, overall, there's excellent stuff about how to make things and how to put things together and using these things, and he's made treasure tables, these big fat treasure tables you can roll on and get these really cool things, and I just pick up that book every now and then and I will roll on that table just to see what cool thing a monster will drop or something when they're defeated, something like that, you know? He's gone for that mishmash of classic and video game style, and it really goes very well together. Really great as a toolbox. Okay, what number is this? Number 6, 5, or 7? Number 7. Okay, number 7 is Beyond the Wall. So, what this is, it's inspired by sort of the older children's fantasy, and I really like that era of fantasy, like Wizard of Earthsea sort of thing. So, the first thing about this is that they've wanted to design it in such a way that when you're starting the game, the sort of the preliminary stuff that you do before a game, they wanted to make that part of the game. They wanted to make that the story element of the game. And we had loads of fun, and they give you these sheets of tables on them, and you roll on these tables, and it makes the story of your character. So it will say like where your character's from and what they're like, and you're rolling this, and you're like, oh yeah, I can use this in this way. But it also then adds to mechanically how your character is designed, and then it also adds to a map, like the map of your hometown, and it just feels like, oh yeah, this came from this, and this came from this, and it all just comes together at the beginning of the game, and you're ready to get on, and just, you got all this stuff, and you're like, let's go, let's do it, I got all this stuff. Then you get into the game, and then we were a bit like, oh, I can only cast one spell once. That was really rubbish. So, the story elements of the game were amazing, but it goes to be an OSR game. It tries to be a more old school game, and because of that, it's a lot more harsh. And harsh isn't necessarily bad, but it means that you're a lot slower. And I really felt like we got off to a really great start of all these stories, and then we just hit this slow wall, and it was like, oh, okay, I'll just eat one of these berries that it took me 5 hours to make, and I've restored 1 health for that or something, you know what I mean? Now, yes, they're trying to emulate those children's books where, you know, you are children, the characters in this are children basically. They're trying to emulate that, and the children aren't magically all powerful, are they, in those books? They are, you know, slow, and the story is thoughtful. So, from a design perspective, they've done fine, and I like it. I like all the stuff in it. It's great. So, yeah, you get a full game, and it's good for that style of gentleness. And there's even sheets for designing adventures in the same way that the characters are designed, and I think that's really cool. They don't write out what happens in an adventure. They give you a sheet with like blank bits in it, and you sort of roll on it, and you also sort of apply things you've already learned from your previous characters. So I think this is a very good story engine, but yeah, okay. Alright then. Next is number 6, which is Ryuutama. This is Japanese. I like Japanese RPGs. I like the take on that, the non-heaviness of a Japanese RPG. So I always wanted this, and I knew it was going to be the kind of thing that I'd read cover to cover, you know what I mean? And it's really pretty, a real nice artwork. This is the aesthetic of the game that I would like to play. This is what I like, okay? So the guy who wrote it, he is a professional RPG person. He runs games. That's his job in a RPG cafe in Japan. And over time, he would get a bit weary of it. And so he thought, what can I make that's easy for people who just wander into the cafe, and we can just sit down and play something like that? And what it is is much more about travel, going from town to town, than it is hack and slash, I suppose. There's actually no dungeon in this at all. I do think there's 3 paths to an adventure: town, overworld, and dungeon. And the town and the overworld are underused in every other game. But in this, it's the main focus of the game. But because it's the main focus of the game, it also shifts it away from the dungeon, which doesn't exist in here. Now, that might not be much of a complaint because it's still really like an evocative, and the rules are well designed. Everything's there for you. But when you get down to it, the characters' powers, they don't have any like dungeony powers, all their powers is to do with like travel. And it's just all travel. And that's not a problem. I bought this for the travel because travel's underused. I love travel. So very nice game. Very lovely. I think this has probably been one of my most inspirational things out of everything that I've read, I just would like there to be a little bit more. Another thing that's good about it, actually, is that the person who runs the game, right, they play a dragon. And there's different dragons to choose. The whole thing's about dragons, right? And they have different powers, and it's about guiding the characters through basically like a really gentle anime film is what it tries to be like. All right then, well, that's pretty good. All right, number 5 is the magical land of Yeld, which is very colourful and nice. So this is done by like a comic book artist. You can see that it's inspired by things like Pokemon, Legend of Zelda, Neopets. It reminds me of Neopets a lot. I don't know if anyone's ever played that, but having grown up with those things, you can tell they've grown up with those things as well, and they've put a lot of colour and adventure into it. I guess because of that, they're aiming it more, the characters in it are children, but they've done a really cool kind of story and stuff like that, where you get trapped in the magical land, and if you don't get out before like your 13th birthday or something, you start to turn into a monster and stuff like that, and you got to collect these keys, and it's just really cool. Like, it comes with a whole game. I know that sounds like a silly thing to say when they're all games, but it's got this whole game in it, and it doesn't expect you to get any more of it. You can play through, I don't know how many keys there are to collect, like maybe 8 keys. Like, there's all these scenarios, there's a boss at the end, and then there's a final boss. I just think that's really cool. Pretty much every item is drawn and out as well, and it's just really pretty to look at. I did find it a bit hard to read because it was stark white and black text, like a comic book. For me personally, reading, that was a bit glaring on my eyes. I don't know. It's in the middle of the list because I would say that maybe the system with the dice and that kind of thing is a little bit loose. It's a bit strange here and there. Like a bow will give you plus agility, right? That's useful when you're firing a bow, yeah? But you can also use your bow when you're climbing a tree, and in a story sense, it makes sense that you could shoot an arrow up into the tree, right? But you're not going to do that every single time you climb a tree. You're just going to say, okay, I just add my +1 from my bow and climb a tree. And all the items give you that, because obviously it's based off of those video games where, you play a video game and you get a random item and it just gives you like extra stamina, even though it's just a sword. Like, how can it give you stamina, So because that does that, it is a bit weird when you're like, okay, don't forget to roll your boots dice when you're having a drink. It doesn't seem quite right. But other than that, it's playful and fun. So yeah, I definitely would recommend it. Okay. All right. Number 4 is Torchbearer. And this is very tightly written and mechanically sound, and everything works together. It's based off of Burning Wheel, which is more complicated, but because it's based off of Burning Wheel, everything has a part, everything revolves, the whole thing's supposed to be like an engine in a machine, and it does have that complication to it that might put some people off, but because of that, everything just feels right. The main thing about this is it puts the crawl into dungeon crawl. If you like those kind of, I don't know, like those really old computer games where every step you take and every food you eat and every torch you have is like, oh, am I going to have enough? That's what this is like. You've got slots in your backpack and stuff, and the light in this is excellently designed. This taught me how to do light properly, right? Because you read another book and it's like, it's a candle and it sheds the 30 foot of light and dim light and all that. I don't care about that. This just says, candle gives light, one person, done. I like that. And once you're in the dark, that's it, you know. That's why it's called Torchbearer, because it's all about, can we make it with the resources that we have, and that resource being time, light, you know, that sort of thing. Because light and time are entwined. So it's definitely more gritty. It's definitely not heroic. But if you want a proper dungeon crawl, and even just to combine it with something else that is heroic, it brings you down to a reasonable and enjoyable level, other than just going around kicking some doors in, picking up some treasure and coming back home to bed, basically. Alright, so yeah, I really like that as well. Alright. Okay, number 3 is 13th Age, which is basically one of the lead designers of 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons and the lead designer of 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons got together and they said, this is the game we wanted to make, but couldn't. So you know that you're in an excellent spot. That's why it starts off the top 3. Out of everything on this list, this is probably the first choice for people who are coming over from, you know, the regular game. They've tried to make each class unique, and each class feels different and does different things, and I like that. I like that you're like, I'm playing the cleric, I'm playing the fighter, and there's loads of little bits and bobs that you can get for your character, little powers that you can level up into that get you more fightery things, that sort of thing, and magic-y things. This is a game about heroes, and they want you to just start out at level 1 as very heroic. That like a level 1 character in this is probably like equivalent to a 3rd or 5th level character in another standard game. And they're really encouraging, and they actually talk to you in this. They have little sidebars. The designers talk to you and say things, and they're actually quite fun and nice and to read. They know that you're going to be smart and that you're going to appreciate what they've written, but also they appreciate what you want to do. So they encourage you to change bits and bobs of it as well. The only downside, I think, is because each class is unique, I don't feel there's enough content for each class for me to make something that is unique for me, I guess. So if I choose a class and then it says, okay, here are 6 powers. Now choose 5 of them. That doesn't feel like I'm choosing 5 powers, is it? That just feels like I'm not choosing 1 power. They've obviously put a lot of work into it, and I cannot say they've done anything bad for that, but I needed twice the amount of powers so I could feel like I was choosing them. Now, obviously, they counter that by saying, phrase it how you like. It's your power. Do it how you want. So I changed a couple of the powers around so that they weren't doing what they said they were doing in the book. And that was the way of making it unique. So, you know, that's the counterbalance there. Bring the creativity to it, right? But yeah, I really like it. I think it's really smart. And I actually found this really enjoyable to read because everything that you're reading about it is them saying this or this cool thing here. There's another cool thing I like in this where like the healer can choose to cast the healing for 1 or for lots. And you can do that in Final Fantasy, like when you cast a heal spell in that game, you can choose to cast it on 1 person, or you can cast it on the whole party, and it spreads out the healing instead of it just being for 1 person. I thought that was a really cool thing. I've not really seen that anywhere in a book before, so yes, definitely 13th Age, very good. Okay? Alright, well, number 2 is Forbidden Lands, which comes in a big box. And the reason why it's number 2 is because it comes in a big box and you get all of the stuff in a big box. And the reason why it's here is because out of all the books on the list, this is the one that gives you the feel of playing the game for the first time. It makes you feel like back in the day. Sort of that, the image that you see of people playing this game in their parents' basement sitting around a table after school, right? That's what this gives you the feel of. And in this game, they say that they wanted to make a game that had that classic feel and yet was made up with modern sentimentalities and mechanics. And they have absolutely succeeded. I know a lot of people have claimed to do that before, but this is the first thing that I've read where I was like, you have done that. Reading this, it made me feel like when I was like a kid, and I remember reading fantasy books when I was a kid, and I would take the ideas to school and play them in a game that I made, and this kind of brings back that feeling for me, because you're reading this book, and as you read the rules, they've also got little bits of story and little bits of characters. I'm not sure I 100% agree with their story and their characters, because they've gone for a slightly gritty approach. But in terms of discovering a game from fresh, taking a box, opening it, and everything that you need is right there, I really, really got to praise it for that, and that's why it's number 2. Are there books on this list that are better to play? Probably, maybe, but it's got to be at number 2, because they set out to do a thing, they succeeded in doing that thing, here's that thing, in a box thing, things. Okay. Yeah, so that's number 2. Alright then. So, finally, number 1 is Dungeon Crawl Classics. Wow then, there's a clue in the name really, isn't there? This was one, I saw a picture of it, and I thought, oh no, what's this really old book that I won't be able to get because it's clearly really old but looks really cool. But the aesthetic that they've made of this is they've made it on purpose to look like from the olden days. So this is number 1 because of the clear amount of effort that they've put into absolutely all of what they've done. The writing is very clever. They know that you are a sensible person who can read a book and are going to play this game how you want to play this game. It doesn't feel dumbed down. It just gets straight to the point. And they even say, whatever, you're probably going to change it anyway. So the system is different because they go with this feel of a retro feel. The first thing that you do is you don't make a character. You just randomly generate 4 characters who are really weak. And then you go through this dungeon that's really deadly. And anyone who comes out the end will then go on to become adventurers. It's a different way of doing it. Now, I mean, if I wanted to sit down and get right into a game, I don't think that I would use that method. But for the sake of fun, which at the end of the day is what it is, they have piled on the creativity. The greatest thing about this that everyone obviously loves it for is the magic, and the magic in here is extremely good. So basically, the higher level that your wizard gets, the more powerful your magic gets. So the magic scales up with you, and you can end up doing ridiculous things like, I don't know, blowing up an entire castle by accident because your spell was so powerful. The other thing about it is it goes unfavorably. How do you say that? It goes unfavorably for you as well. If you roll really badly, then the magic, they've written things that will affect you. I remember my wizard, Idlefarsk, he cast Magic Missile, but I rolled a 1, so I looked in the book, and then it said that he blasted a hole in the ground instead, and then he fell down the hole. And then it took him ages to climb out the hole, and then he cast Magic Shield to protect somebody, and I rolled another 1, and then the shield, I looked in the book and it said the shield appeared under him, but as a horizontal plane instead of a vertical shield, and it was slippy, so he slipped back into the hole again that he just blown up. And I really love that attention to detail, because it's like you're playing of the book and the book's playing with you. You know what I mean? You've got a bit of both of you's like joining in. Instead of it just chucking some rules on you and going, here you go, off you go, get on with it then, basically. The aesthetic is to go with that old school feel, and because of that, because of the weakness of the characters, they write in such a way that they're presenting the game as not being a heroic game. And on the one hand, I appreciate that mechanically, because it's focusing on what's important as opposed to piling on some really cool powers. But on the other hand, I personally don't like the hack and slash gritty, bloody aesthetic that they've done. But that's the aesthetic they've gone for. But it's important to know that going into it, that there's a lot of that. And there's a lot of, well, not a lot of, but some of the artwork is slightly gruesome. It's not as bad as some other games I've seen, but it's a little bit like, ugh. But I just glance over that. So it's important to note that I'm not putting it as number 1 because of the retro feel, although that's excellent. It's the way that they've presented it and the way they've made it and the effort they've put into the game that makes it number 1. Not just because I happen to like old school stuff. I like all the stuff, really. They've worked really hard on each of the classes. Each of the classes feel very unique. You've got a fighter and he does fighting. And you've got a healer and they do healing. And you've got a wizard and they do blowing things up with their magic and stuff like that. They've worked hard on the classes. I suppose the downside of that is you're going to struggle to make a character who's individual from each time you play. You're not going to get the kind of customization that you'd get in another game where you're a wizard but you're also got wings coming out of your back and you happen to, that sort of thing, right? So I really like it. I really think they've done an excellent job. They've clearly worked very hard on it, and it lets you get straight into the game and straight into what it is. It literally is a dungeon crawl classic. I'm putting it at number 1 because it just has absolutely everything right there from the get-go. So yeah. Okay. So yeah, there we go. That was a list of things on the list. I suppose there is one more thing to talk about briefly, and that is that out of all the things we've talked about, there is one more game, and that game is the game that you kind of make yourself from all the different bits and bobs from all the different games. That is, at the end of the day, the ultimate game. There is no perfect game apart from that one, is there? So, yeah. Okay, well, that's the list. How do you end the list like that? How do you end it? Yeah, so I hope someone has found something on this list that is exciting or new or interesting or something that they want to try out, because that's the reason why I'm making the list. Okay. Alright then, well, there we go, end of the list. Bye then.